Alan Tudge now. He's the Minister responsible. Will be making the announcement later today. Alan Tudge, thank you for your time. What is wrong with the data you have at the moment? What information don't you have available to you? What resources don't you have to make these decisions?
G'day, Laura. In essence, what this Centre for Population will do is aggregate a lot of the different data sets that we already have. Now, we have about 8 different data sets within the Commonwealth Government which aren't integrated at the moment. So the first step is going to be to integrate that data. And then ideally we integrate the state government's data as well that concerns population. Second, we do want to have better forecasting capability. Typically, at the moment, we've actually done more projections rather than forecasts. And what I mean by that is that you tend to look backwards as to what's occurred and then model that going forwards rather than actually forecasting precisely what might likely occur based on your policy settings going forward. And then I think thirdly though, Laura, it's about having greater transparency for everybody to see so that we can then integrate our population forecast, what's occurring around Australia with the infrastructure, with the housing approvals, with the services, etc.
What's the end game here? Is it less overseas migration or just more managed?
No, in some respects there's a few objectives here. The most important objective still is to support our growing economy, and population is a very important driver to that, not just in terms of overall GDP, but GDP per capita, i.e. our population settings make a difference in terms of how individually wealthy we are. But secondly, we do want to ensure that our cities maintain their livability. And previously, over the last couple of decades, we've had tremendous growth in our big capital cities, but very little growth in some of the smaller cities and the regional areas. So our objective is to take a little bit of the heat out of the big capitals and support the growth of those other areas, particularly the regional areas, actually, which are struggling to find workers. And then the third objective really, Laura, is to ensure that Australia maintains its harmony and stays together. So those 3 things have to come together in our overall population plan. We've already outlined the initial steps of that, but there's obviously more work to be done.
Just this week we saw the skills shortage data for the last financial year as well. There's now 39 skills on that list. That's 3 more than the year before. How are you putting that data into this research and collaborating that?
So that's a key thing which is done and updated every 6 to 12 months in terms of what the skills shortage lists are, and that determines whether or not a business can sponsor somebody into the country. But we've certainly been leaning more aggressively in, and I know that this Pete sort of raised this, how do you manage population? In some respects, we've leant in much more heavily already over the last 6 months on this by actually reducing the migration rate down by about 15% on the permanent migration. Second, though, we've created a lot more incentives for new migrants who come into the country to go to some of the smaller cities and the regional areas. This includes international students, which are a very big part of the incoming people coming into the country, but as well as for permanent migrants to go to some of those other areas, because the default position typically is that most people come into Melbourne and Sydney, and to a lesser extent Brisbane. Those 3 locations have 75% of our overall population growth right now, whereas ideally we'd have a slightly better distribution of that growth. As
we just mentioned as well, immigration is intrinsically linked to the growth of our economy. Is part of your remit here to, I guess, decouple that into the future, albeit slowly, because it was Scott Morrison as Treasurer who said a cut in the migration intake. I think the suggestion from Tony Abbott at the time was around 90,000 as an annual cap. That would cost our economy about $3 billion.
Well, population is a critical component to our economic growth. I mean, there's 3 big levers to economic growth. They're the 3 Ps, as people might know: population, participation, productivity. So population is one of them. But it doesn't just support overall GDP growth for the country, but it supports GDP per capita growth because it does critically support our participation rate. Because we tend to bring in people who are, on average, are 26 years of age, which is much younger than the overall average age for Australians. And that means we've got a larger working class population to support the ageing of the population. It also supports productivity as well, because typically people who come into the country have higher skills, or at least they've got higher qualifications than the average Australian. And so it does support productivity as well. So it is critically important at that lens. But we also need to make sure that we maintain the livability of the cities, that we support the regions that need more people, and that's where we need to balance that out and lean more strongly in. So our population settings, though, just aren't about immigration. They also are about other factors that we can put into place. The infrastructure to be aligned, working with the states and territories so we're planning better, faster rail to some of the satellite cities so that we can get growth in those satellite cities,
but you're not thinking about
growth,
limiting how many
cities.
children we can have here in Australia, are you?
No, Laura. So we're all
checking.
safe on that count. I mean, but immigration does constitute about 60% of our overall population growth. Natural factors about the other 40%.
Just finally, are you perhaps looking at a scenario where you link the annual overseas migration intake to progress in infrastructure or to those skills shortages? So could there be a scenario where that cap, and I know you're not meeting the cap at the moment, that cap changes perhaps on a 2-yearly or 5-yearly or even annual basis?
It's a good question, Laura, and it's almost precisely what we're endeavouring to do is much more closely match our population growth with the infrastructure and housing approvals in the cities and the regions. And we need to do that with the states and territories. So I'll be meeting up along with the Treasurer, with the other Treasurers later this month, and then it'll be at the leaders where we'll be talking about what we're calling a population planning framework. And it's deliberately designed to do that. This Centre for Population, though, becomes the key repository of the information to support that effort.
Alan Tudge, appreciate your time this morning.